Hey, Mark, how's it going? I see you're unmuted there. Oh, maybe not. I'm just messaging Mark now. Okay. No worries. Well, John, you're on, and you're up as a speaker as well. Looks like
Outstanding.
you're able to speak. So, I guess we can just kick off while we wait for Dave and for Adam and for David to join. So, yeah, how's it all going? How's your week been?
It's been outstanding, outstanding. I think it's interesting the debate for the fact that the crypto industry is spending about half of all the election spending is coming from crypto. There wasn't a single mention of it in debate, which was kind of a relief.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that. Yeah, and I saw that the Dems put out a policy paper as well recently, and no mention of crypto in that as well. Much to Tyler Winklevoss's dismay.
It's the amount of money being spent. I mean, Molly White's put together a website that kind of covers it all, and the Washington Post wrote a very extensive piece about it. The numbers are staggering. I mean, I think from Coinbase and Ripple alone, you're talking about in the hundreds of millions of dollars, like 150 or something like that. Mark probably knows these numbers better than me, but they are incredibly high and unprecedented.
Yeah, John, if you can hear me, I've just logged in. And another organization we work with, folks, I'm Mark Hayes with Americans for Financial Reform. Our ally Public Citizen put out a report tabulating this information, and I believe they calculated that the super PAC Fair Shake was one of the largest, if not the largest, super PAC spender in this cycle. So it's pretty astonishing how quickly it's happened. I think it's not so surprising given that there's a very small number of donors that represent the overwhelming share of that money. It's about, depending on how you count, 6 to a dozen people, mostly folks either associated with firms like Andreessen Horowitz, Coinbase, or Ripple. And those are firms that have a lot of resources. So that helps explain the spending to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, are they just giving it to candidates, Mark, or what are they doing with that money?
Well, the super PAC money is obviously independent spending, and so they can't directly give to candidates, but they can support candidates. And then, in addition to that, there are a number of different tranches of funding that individuals and companies can give to with different rules, right? So you have contributions to campaign committees that are sort of pooled money for resources, whether it's like the DCCC or the Republican Senate Campaign Committee, that sort of thing. And then you have direct contributions to candidates and their campaign committees and their spending limits. Though not my current role, but in other roles, I've worked on campaign finance reform, and there's a lot of paper on bundlers, right? People who sort of orchestrate giving on amongst a large group of people to sort of maximize contribution limits. So I don't know if that's happening here, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised because it's a pretty typical approach for large corporate spenders in election politics.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that, Mark. So obviously it is election season. I wanted to talk a lot about that in this conversation. I think we're just getting some of the other speakers in at the moment. We've got Dave with us as well. So look, why don't we just kick off, and then I can sort out David and Adam as well in a second. So yeah, just to begin then, for people who aren't aware, I am, just a bit about my background. I'm Jake Donoghue. I used to work in the crypto industry. I set up some projects back in 2021. And grew increasingly kind of disenfranchised with just the amount of fraud, the amount of crime in the space. So I left and turned whistleblower. So I wrote a book called Crypto Confidential that came out a few weeks ago, basically just kind of lifting the lid on how the industry kind of really operates, and how a lot of those frauds and those scams are able to take place. So that's me. I mean, probably my guests here probably need a little less introduction than I do, but I'll hand over to Dave if you're there. If you can hear me, to give a bit about your background as well.
Yeah, sure. So my background, and thank you for having me on today. I appreciate it. My background is as a tech entrepreneur, and I've been involved in the tech industry for 30 some years. I guess I first started looking at the crypto space probably 10, 12 years ago, like when it was pretty nascent, and just sort of experimenting with things and trying to understand how it worked and and all of that. Over the course of the last 10 years, given all of the things that have gone on geopolitically, I have been diving into the realm of information warfare and doing journalism on that set of topics. And I've written a lot of articles and am currently working on a book on that set of topics. And one of the things that you come across if you spend any time in that space looking at it critically is the role that cryptocurrency plays in geopolitics. And I think this is mostly underexplored by people. I think there's some people that very much understand kind of like what the intention was behind something like Bitcoin and some of the derivative, blockchains and stuff. And, when you look at it as a potential vehicle to challenge, sort of the dollar and the central banks and the Federal Reserve and all of that, it starts to paint a different kind of a picture about what the intent and purpose of these things are. And obviously, there's, as you mentioned, a lot of fraud and other kinds of nefarious activity that exists in the space just because there's a whole bunch of affordances that these technologies provide that, give way to those sorts of things. There's also just a lot of geopolitical layering that people just need to fully understand in order to really make sense of what this stuff is and what it's really intended to do. So my goal has been to try to unearth as much of that as possible to help people understand the history, which really requires a great deal of understanding of kind of the history of the gold standard and going back, in the United States context, at least 150 years to like the Civil War, and the relationship between gold and silver and slavery and all of this. And it's an incredibly rich and interesting set of history to explore, but it goes way beyond just sort of like, oh, it's tech, oh, it's blockchain, oh, it's crypto. It's much deeper than that. So we can get into as much of that or, as little of that as you'd like. But that's really been my interest. And my current set of concerns are really, what does this mean for, say, the US dollar? What does it mean for the economy? What do things like the debt ceiling, what kind of risk does that pose in the next few months? And really, what are the intentions of people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel with respect to using crypto and specifically, Bitcoin as a way to challenge dollar hegemony, and how does that align with, say, Putin and Xi's goals around the BRICS currency idea and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, we can get into as much of that as you'd like, but that's my primary interest.
Yeah, Dave, thanks a lot for that. That's really great. And I know that, you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise in this area. So yeah, looking forward to getting your insights on all the things we're going to discuss a bit later. John Reed Stark, over to you.
Sure. My background's very different than Dave. I don't have nearly his technical chops, which are so impressive. And I want to thank you, Jake, for putting this together. I think this is really unprecedented to have this kind of group, and I was very excited about it. I'm a big admirer of Mark Hayes, a big admirer of Dave Troy. My background's a little more on the legal side. Um, I worked at the SEC for almost 20 years. For 11 years, I was chief of the Office of Internet Enforcement, which meant doing all kinds of technology-related crimes. I taught at the FBI in Quantico, the FBI Academy in Quantico for about a decade. I taught at Georgetown Law School, a technology in the law course for about 15 years as an adjunct. And then for 5 years at Duke, I taught a similar course about technology. And then I left the SEC and ran the DC office of Strauss Friedberg, which was an interesting group of people. Started out, I think, when I was there as maybe 50 or 60. And I think when they were sold to Aon, there were maybe 400 or 500. But it was a group of a lot of former technology specialists from the FBI, from the Department of Justice, and I was from the SEC, from all kinds of different government organizations. And we were essentially an incident response firm and a digital forensics firm. And so I started getting into all different kinds of cyber attacks and how to defend when I was in that running that DC office. And ransomware started rearing its ugly head. And I love these people who say that ransomware did exist before crypto. It didn't. Okay, there were maybe some stupid thing that would come up on your screen, pay $10 or we'll tell the world that you've been watching porn for the last year, something like that. But it didn't. When ransomware suddenly took hold, it was all because of Bitcoin, and it remains all because of Bitcoin, all of these crimes. So I got really interested in that around 2017, and I started writing about it. I left Strauss Friedberg in about 2015 to start my own firm. And I got really interested in all the things that were going on in crypto. And I just couldn't believe it. None of it made any sense to me. It still makes no sense to me. So since that time, I haven't made a nickel. I'm not writing a book on crypto. I'm not. I don't work for any crypto companies. I have not a stake at all in any of this mess. I just feel like at this stage in my life that it's important for somebody to try to speak the truth about this stuff whenever possible. And it's exhausting sometimes because I don't think any of us, Mark Hayes is probably one of the hardest working guys out there in this space, just working so hard all the time to try to educate, to speak to the Hill. I've testified on the Hill just recently. I think Mark's testified as well, but it's really not an easy constituency to represent because there's really no force behind any of it. So it's incredibly ironic. I think Dave is remarkably correct when he talks about the geopolitical aspects of all of this. It's just so ironic to me that Bitcoin was started as this libertarian notion of disintermediation. That's what it was called before it was called decentralized finance. This whole notion of getting rid of all these big, terrible banks because they exploit people, and all that's happened in the cryptoverse is they've been replaced by a lot worse. And I couldn't have been more disappointed when Gary Gensler went against his own party and actually voted in favor of the Bitcoin ETF, which I think has done terrible things to the financial markets. I think there's awful systemic risk to what's going on. And I think it's a big Ponzi scheme that's going to fall apart. And the hundreds of cases that the SEC have now won, it's incredible because, Jake, what's so interesting about these cases is that they're so well financed on the defense side that judges have written these exhaustive 100-page decisions, and I've read every single one of them. And all of these decisions are saying that these things, this mathematical computational equations are securities, that the way that they are bundled. And it's amazing to me that no matter what kind of loss the crypto industry takes, the spin, it doesn't pass the straight face test. I mean, every time I read these cases, and I read them in detail like a law professor, I'm happy to read one if it says that the SEC has done something wrong. Most of my writing, I'm pretty libertarian myself, pretty conservative. Most of my writing has been against what the SEC has done, but not in the crypto space. So that's kind of a long introduction for where I'm coming from. But I can't tell you how happy I am to be amongst this group today, talking to you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, John. Yeah, really, really appreciate that. And yeah, it's really great to have you here. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Jake, and thank you too for having us here. I'm excited as well, and John, I appreciate those kind words. The feelings mutual. I've learned a lot from you. I'll try to be quick because I know we've got other speakers and lots to talk about. So I'm Mark Hayes. I'm a senior policy analyst with Americans for Financial Reform and Demand Progress. AFR was a coalition of civil rights, consumer, and labor organizations that was formed in the 2008 global financial crisis to advocate for reforms to address the problems that resulted in that crisis, the accountability needed for Wall Street firms, the remedies for the individuals harmed. And we've gone on to be a part of a lot of different financial reform efforts focused on everything from private capital markets to the creation and the defense of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and a host of other things. And the common denominator is really trying to push for policies that protect consumers, investors, and communities with a racial and economic justice lens. Demand Progress cut its teeth as a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on internet freedom and challenging concentrated economic and corporate power. And they're well known for some of their work during the mid-2000s, long before my time, mid-2012s or whatever you call that, on the SOPA PIPA battles and the internet freedom fights. But they came into this space, and AFR came into the space in some part when Facebook's Libra coin was announced. And on the consumer side, there was a tremendous amount of concern about how an entity like Facebook might consolidate control over an important aspect of the payment system, and marry kind of the consolidation we see in the banking system with the data sort of mining model you see in kind of Web 2 platform-based internet companies. And I think, our biggest concerns is just there are already a lot of companies that come into this space that say that they provide some sort of innovative approach to finance. There are really big problems in finance. We fight them every day with a lot of entrenched power structures. And the claim that technology is going to provide new opportunities could be true, but more often what we see is that it's a path for regulatory evasion. And so we're really concerned about making sure that the standards are consistent across the board for all of these players, because if not, then you create races to the bottom that not only can create loopholes so that people can exploit, but really financial instability, the kind of things that caused the crisis in the first place. So that's why we're focused on crypto, among many other things. We have a lot of concerns about this space. And I came to this work doing environmental human rights work in global international spheres, and actually spent about 6 years looking at financial transparency and illicit finance. And I think looking at through that lens, I think it's hard to estimate just how large the scope of that problem is and how it affects not just kind of narrowly focused criminal justice issues, but issues that range from tax evasion to human rights abuses to environmental degradation. So it's in that context that crypto creates problems as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Mark. And yeah, I know a lot of us here are familiar with your work and with the work of Americans for Financial Reform, and know that you're doing a lot of great stuff. So thanks for joining us. And just quickly before we go on to Adam, just to flag, I'm trying to get David Gerard into the space as well, but for some reason we're having some tech difficulties. So he is here, I think, somewhere. So still trying to bring him up as a speaker. So I'll work away on that in the background. But Adam, AmericanScream, over to you.
Thanks, Jake. Thank you for having me on, and it's great to be part of this really seriously capable group of people here. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Adam R. Smith. I'm a software engineer, have about 40 plus years of experience designing software pre the internet as well as into the internet. I formed an ISP in the early 90s and eventually became a CLEC, a local phone company. I have extensive experience in emerging markets with technology. I've written books on web design. I've had a software publishing company in the 80s and the 90s. And I'm basically just, a software engineer that likes new technology and is always interested in anything that comes out. So when Bitcoin came out, I looked into it. I thought it was an interesting concept, but I never really found much value in it as an engineer as far as what it offered to do. It was an interesting experiment. I had no idea that over time it would morph into this bizarre thing that people are calling a long-term store of value. And I've seen a lot of my friends basically get taken advantage of in these schemes. And I started to become an activist just because I got tired of seeing people spread lies about my industry, saying that the blockchain is a useful database and it's got all kinds of value and it can hedge against inflation and Bitcoin and crypto. So I eventually became one of the mods of Reddit's largest crypto critical community called Buttcoin. And of course, in the early days, we just made fun of crypto because we never really thought that it was worthy of anything other than just mockery. We had no idea it was going to grow to the size that it has. And over time, we've become a little bit more serious, realizing that this is a dangerous scheme that's imposed on people. As a software engineer, I like to talk about blockchain, the underlying technology that everything in crypto is based on. And so I produced and wrote and edited a documentary called Blockchain Innovation or Illusion, which was my attempt to put out some definitive information on how blockchain works for those that are not familiar with it, and specifically why it doesn't live up to the claims that it promises. And if you go to my website, blockchainii.com, the video is on YouTube and everybody can watch it. And like John Reed Stark, who I have tremendous respect for, there's not really much financial incentive for me to do what I'm doing other than just, I think it's better to be in a world with less fraud and deception. And I find that crypto and blockchain is almost exclusively composed of fraud and deception. And I'm happy to talk about that and talk about the technology behind it. I have a podcast at ioradio.org where I try to bring on pro-crypto people and debate them and get them to explain to me what use case blockchain has that actually does something better than what we have already. And we're now 15 years into this technology and nobody can answer that basic question, which I call the ultimate crypto tech question, which is name something this tech does that's better than what we're already using. And I just am astounded at how this is the big elephant in the room that nobody in the mainstream media wants to talk about. So that's what mainly motivates me, is to just spread the word that we're 15 years into this, and the only thing it seems to be particularly useful for is criminal activity. So.
Yeah, exactly. No, thanks a lot for that, Adam. That's that's really great. I mean, very interested, by what you've said around, specifically what it was that motivated you to, kind of speak out and become a crypto critic, a very vocal crypto critic. As we were saying before, this is something that is often quite unrewarding work, and there's not much in it apart from kind of like you were saying, speaking up and getting the word out about kind of fraudulent activities and that kind of thing. I'd be very keen to hear from the other speakers, about what is it specifically that kind of motivates you kind of day in, day out to do this and to and to speak out against crypto crime and things like that. Dave, I don't know if there's anything, any kind of particular motivation that you might feel around that.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that, it's a combination of just kind of moral outrage as well as personal self-interest. Like, I find this kind of outrageous because, not only are we dealing with something that's potentially, destabilizing to people's investments, we're also talking about something that has big geopolitical implications potentially. And, if you believe in the notions of representative democracy and you want the world to continue sort of on an incremental path of trying to make improvements and, create more justice in the world, all of that sort of thing, I think you have to look at this stuff from a very big picture perspective and, think about where harms may come from, where benefits may come from. And, I think that, quite frankly, a lot of people sort of in the what I would call the normie world are playing the threat that this stuff poses because they don't understand the intent behind it. And I also think that the people that are proponents of these technologies are kind of guilty of the same thing. They're, very much counting on network effects to drive the advancement of, these technologies, and also on, they're relying on capture. We've seen, as was mentioned earlier, that crypto money has been playing a significant role in campaign finance in the United States in this cycle. So, that's only going to continue to grow if it's left unchecked. And so my belief is that we need to have an adult, technically competent, democratic kind of, discourse about this, which is frankly, perhaps, a lot to expect of modern democracies where a lot of discourse gets boiled down into really stupid sound bites and people are not terribly thoughtful a lot of the time. But my overall feeling is that if this doesn't get put in check right now, you're going to have a potential situation where, people who are non-participants are unfairly harmed by changes that are wrought by people who are looking to advance these technologies. And, that's not fair. And I think a lot about grandmas and pensioners who are trying to, secure a future that's sane for themselves. And they don't deserve to be dragged into this crazy conflict. It's very much a tool of warfare. And I think if you don't look at it from that perspective, it can sneak up on you and take everybody by surprise. And the fact that, crypto spending in this election cycle has exceeded that of big oil should give everybody some cause for concern. This is now a bigger factor in this election than big oil. That's a big deal. So, from my perspective, the motivation is because this is the morally correct thing to do. And also, I've worked hard to be financially secure in my life, and I don't need, that to be challenged by a bunch of crazy people. And no, I'm not going to participate in it in order to try to benefit, because I don't think it makes any sense. So it's very much, an investment thesis on my part that this is dumb and should be killed with fire.
Jake, I couldn't agree more with Dave. Just recently, you might have seen in the news that, and I've read this in the news, so I haven't heard Morgan Stanley actually say it, but Morgan Stanley said that they were, or somehow it was reported that Morgan Stanley was going to send out their 15,000 investment advisors, or they call them wealth advisors, whatever you want to call them, out to go start and selling Bitcoin spot ETF interests, whatever that means. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that any compliance person on this planet would allow that kind of thing can happen, because allow it to happen. Because when you think about it, if you're recommending, first of all, if you're an investment advisor, you have an incredible fiduciary duty, much bigger than any other fiduciary duty in finance. You have to really understand your client's circumstance before you put them in any kind of investment. But let's just even take a step back from that. What are you saying when you say to your client, hey, you should invest in Bitcoin because? What's the next sentence? Because they have great earnings, because they have great management, because they have a great product, because their balance sheet is very strong, because their income statement is exceptional, because their employees are so terrific. None of this is it's all there's no quantitative, qualitative, or any kind of data that anyone can use to figure out what the value of Bitcoin should be, other than to say there are plenty of fools out there that will buy more of it. So you might as well invest in it. So calling it a store of value, of course, is absurd, and calling it anything. So I don't understand how a legitimate finance professional can make this kind of recommendation to anyone, because I don't understand what could possibly follow in the next sentence when you say buy Bitcoin because, other than to say because we think it's going to go up. Well, why is it going to go up? Because a lot of people think it's going to go up. That's all that anyone can say. So it's very Alice in Wonderland to me. I don't, and I agree with Dave about the systemic risk, because if you talk about those 15,000 brokers, and the big banks are always doing this. I had a friend, a colleague of mine, Scott Priestad, who died a few years ago, unfortunately, but Scott was an associate director. And every 6 months, he was suing Bank of America for something. This is in the SEC Division of Enforcement. And it was just, they were always trying to sell something stupid to people, and they would con people into buying it, whatever it was. Maybe it was a REIT, maybe it was some kind of annuity, whatever the product was, their Bank of America Securities was out there trying to sell it. And I used to go into Scott's office and go, did you just sue them again? He'd go, yeah. They, of course, their brokers went out and sold this. But what they were doing was not nearly as bad as what these 15,000 brokers are going to do. And hopefully, if any of them have any reasonable credentials, those credentials will be revoked from the Certified Financial Planners Board or the Certified Financial Analyst Board. But I just don't understand how, if you have a fiduciary relationship with someone, you can recommend that you put money into this. And boy, when I put this out on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, I got all this hate. And I just, again, it's mind boggling to me that legitimate financial investment professionals can, with a straight face, say this is great for my client.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point there, John. And I think, yeah, like you were saying, this store of value narrative, I don't, there really isn't anything in there, is there? I mean, it's far too volatile for that. But apart from Bitcoin, this is actually something else that I wanted to ask and to get to get some insights around. Apart from Bitcoin, is there any use in any of the other cryptos out there? Is there any place for crypto, or any kind of crypto like blockchain tech, or smart contracts or anything like that, using kind of blockchain payment rails? Is there any space for that within the traditional financial system? Is it going to improve anything? Is it going to innovate? Adam, I know that you've got some thoughts around this.
Yes, absolutely. I've been asking for, as I said, more than 10 years. Just show me one thing that blockchain does that's better than what we've already been doing. Because the whole concept of disruptive technology means that something is going to come out and it's going to change the way you do things. For example, fax machines were disruptive technology. Before, if you wanted to send something to somebody, you used the postal service, and then when fax machines came out, you could send an image over the phone lines. It immediately did something. Microwave ovens cook food faster, certain foods faster. Very simple. So any disruptive technology that if it promises to change the way we do something, that question should be answerable very, very quickly. What does blockchain do? Well, the problem is if you ask somebody that, they will never give you specifics. Oh, it's decentralized. Oh, it allows you to send value across the planet really quickly. But if you drill down into those specific, well, what kind of value, from where to where, how much, and you find out that it doesn't really work that way. People that say that you can use crypto to send payments, they often assume that the payments are starting out in crypto and ending in crypto. But for most people, when you're sending remittances across the world, these people need it in the fiat currency of their local country. And if you send them Bitcoin or USDC or Tether or something like that, they still have to convert it. And that's where all the hassles and the fees and the delays come back into play. And in every instance where somebody says blockchain has a use case, you'll often find the deeper you dig into it, that it is a poor copy of an existing technology that we've already been using, but it does it slower, it's less scalable, and it introduces more vulnerabilities. And I keep asking this question over and over, just show me one thing. And these crypto proponents, what they do is they gaslight you. They will say, you don't understand what the technology is about. Okay, boomer, have fun staying poor, or, it's a hedge against inflation. It does this, it does that. And but again, it's all vague kinds of things that they're very careful to not get specific enough so that their claims can be qualified as true or false. And I have yet to find any example in any industry. And I'm aware that blockchain has been shoehorned into different industries. There's a United Nations database about carbon credits that's somehow using blockchain, but there's no evidence that blockchain does it better than a standard relational database. And in every instance, the situation where they claimed using NFTs to verify authenticity, that doesn't really work, because while you put something on blockchain and you can prove that it hasn't been altered, the problems that we run into with authenticity are not people hacking databases. The problems we run into with authenticity are the people that input the data in the first place. And blockchain doesn't address that. If you put bad data on the blockchain, then you have bad data. And the fact that it's decentralized, nobody controls it, and it's immutable, means that if you put something bad like child sexual abuse material or a smart contract that has a back door that drains everybody's wallets, if you put that on the blockchain, it's there forever. You can't really get rid of it. Well, we got rid of immutable databases decades ago. It's much better to have a database where if there's bad data, you can replace it. So there's nothing really about blockchain that seems to make sense from a tech point of view. Now, if anybody else can, provide an example, I'm all ears.
Jake, if I can jump in, I wanted to add something to Adam's comments. I think in the financial use case arena, look, we work on financial inclusion issues. There's a huge problem with financial inclusion here and abroad, based in the US. And that's a lot of people are exploited or harmed by existing financial structures. There's no doubt about that. And the industry has tapped into, I think, a real need that folks do have. And I think there are participants in the industry, I think some who in good faith want to believe that the tech or the business models can provide that. But not only, I think, is that often not true, and actually ends up being predatory, there's a risk of over-engineering solutions. And we see that in other sectors, and we see that in finance. So generalizing broadly, if you look at folks that lack access to financial services, at least let's take the US as an example, the kinds of problems that a lot of folks face are hard but straightforward, right? People lack access, the ability to ensure that their pay comes in a timely fashion. So they're worried about checks bouncing. So they go to payday lenders or check cashing facilities. They lack access to low risk, stable forms of credit. so they can finance, day-to-day, purchases or longer-term purchases, and that's tied up into the sort of credit scoring system, which has a lot of inequities. And then they lack access to stable, low-risk, reliable forms of building wealth for the long term. We can have another conversation about the erosion of pensions in the U.S. another day, but that's part of it, as well as income inequality. There are solutions to these problems, whether there's, we've solved real-time payments issues a little bit in Europe comparatively, and you don't use blockchain for that. We could replicate certain things here in the US. You could force banks to provide lower no-cost accounts, or even provide public accounts from, say, the post office. But the point is that if those are the solutions and we have political, economic structures to deal with them, those are the long-term paths we need to take in order to address them. And assuming that technology can be the solution for that ignores the fact that the economics don't necessarily change just because the technology changed. And in fact, it can blind people to how the new entrants from the technological perspective have the same incentives and same conflicts of interests. So one of our concerns is just, why are we over-engineering the solution when the other solutions may be more straightforward and are as much sort of democratic decisions as they are decisions about the right kind of technology to use?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Mark. I think that's a really interesting point. And sorry, everyone, we had some issues bringing David up as a speaker, but he's here with us now. Hopefully, he's able to speak. David, do you want to maybe give a quick intro to yourself and then weigh in on what Mark was just saying?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. So I'm David Gerard, author of Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, the book and the blog, and the book Libra Shrugged. And these days, I'm also writing Pivot to AI with my co-writer, Amy Caster, who says hi. I got into this when I started following Reddit Buckcoin in like 2014, and I wrote Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain in 2016, published right as the bubble was accelerating. So it was the right book at the right time. And somehow this converted itself into half a job as a writer, and I'm still sort of boggling at that years later. So I have a fairly jaundiced view of literally everything about crypto. The blockchain is the most useless thing ever conceived in the history of information technology. Its only use case is constructing financial instruments to operate outside the sight of regulators. That's it. That's the whole purpose. And its purpose is for rich anarcho-capitalists who can think of nothing worse in the world than paying tax. Nobody else actually has a use case for this thing. So that sounds like a simplistic and oversimplified answer, but I assure you it's a deep and detailed one. I mean, everything we can say about it basically follows from that. It's constructed for people to hide money from regulation. You might say that's good. I can think of use cases. All of those use cases are when regulation is somehow iniquitous or unfair, but mostly regulations probably have reasons and are a good idea. Yep, I think is that an intro?
Yeah, no, that's great, David. Thanks so much. So look, I'm going to be taking, I might open the space up to questions from the audience at the end. Also, if anyone has any questions or points to raise while we're chatting, feel free to write them in comments and I'll read them out. We've had a comment from IP Nerd 77 who says on the use cases of Bitcoin here, I think. So buy Bitcoin because it has limited supply that was predetermined a decade ago. As American national debt rises at unprecedented rates, creating a balanced portfolio with a new global decentralized asset. Digital assets are one of the fastest growing assets. Bitcoin is the biggest brand. Does anyone have any thoughts around that? Around the fact that because it has limited supply, that's potentially introduces scarcity, which then introduces value, and Bitcoin's potential to solve the US national debt crisis, which is something that politicians have been talking about recently as well, I think.
So the complete comprehensive answer to that is lol. That's the pitch for Bitcoin, but none of it works. None of it works whatsoever. It goes up because people are foolish enough to think that they can get rich for free. Now, it turns out there's no such thing as getting rich for free. Magic doesn't happen, particularly not with money, and it doesn't happen with Bitcoins either. What we actually see is that the crypto economy relies entirely on dollars coming in, mostly via Coinbase, and those are actually dropping because it helps that Coinbase is a public company and can't lie about this stuff. So we end up with less and less dollars being chased by more and more crypto assets. This results in the thin, ill-regulated market that is Bitcoin, almost all of which is, by the way, 2 trading pairs on Binance. That's where the price is set. You end up with basically it's shenanigans all the way down. Like the market manipulations on Binance. Binance is extremely, extremely regulated now for the money laundering aspect, but the trading floor is not. So every possible market manipulation you can think of that's grossly illegal in the US is just fine. It's probably not even illegal. Wash trading and so on, they're all there and they're all happening. So, none of those claims are true and they should be laughed out the room.
Especially this claim about scarcity being a guarantee of increased value. That is one of the fundamental things that crypto people harp about is there's only 21 million Bitcoin and therefore it's always going to go up in value. And of course, the other side to that argument is this notion of out of control inflation. And so what we find is these crypto people really have no idea how inflation actually works. They just think it's the government is just printing money endlessly. And therefore, since Bitcoin has a finite amount, that somehow magically solves things. And it just shows a complete lack of understanding of everything, as well as just this goofball idea that scarcity means that something is going to be valuable.
What they actually meant was there's only going to be 21 million different cryptos. I think we're currently around a million or so at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's about 1 million little DeFi coins.
What's completely lost on that, I mean, I agree with you both, not surprisingly, to talk about. Now, remember, I was in the SEC Division of Enforcement for 20 years, for almost 20 years. And there was something we used to call the flavor of the month, whatever it was. When HIV was a terrible thing, there was always some kind of HIV cure, sudden overnight cure. When all of the poison was being spread around, there were these vacuum cleaners that could clean up the poison from your mail suddenly. Whatever was going on, there'd be a sudden cure for it, a sudden technology for it. And sometimes you do find technologies that are groundbreaking, like Adam said, like the cloud or the iPhone. But those are obviously revolutionary. And you don't need anybody to explain that to you. All you have to do is pick them up. And when I became chief of the Office of Internet Enforcement, I was an internet evangelist. I would travel around the country telling people how incredible the internet was and explaining to all of our trial lawyers how easy it was going to make how much easier their litigation was going to be. And all of these great things that were happening. You can't do that with crypto except to say there's not a lot of it. Now, what's also lost on that analysis is that remember, none of these intermediaries are registered. So where this stuff is all trading and how it's trading is completely unknown. The SEC registration of financial firms started after the 29 crash with the 33 Act, right? They said, hey, if you're going to offer securities, you have to register with us. Then the 34 Act, hey, if you're going to transact in securities or you're going to be in exchange for securities, you have to register with us. And then the 40 Act, hey, if you're going to be an investment advisor and advise people about securities, then you have to register with us. Well, why did they do all this registration? Because of the systemic risk that became clear in 1929, like as Dave was talking about before, is that by doing all of this, you're putting us all at risk. So why does SEC registration of financial firms matter? Because the way that it mandates the way investors' funds and securities are handled without conflicts of interest. It ensures that investors understand the risks involved in purchasing illiquid and speculative securities, makes buyers aware of last prices over a platform, provides adequate disclosures. There's also audit and examination and inspection of all of these firms. And every single, if a financial firm gets registered, I always say this, it's like a 24/7 financial colonoscopy of their operations. The SEC can show up anytime. So when I was chief of the Office of Internet Enforcement, if I heard that some brokerage firm was selling prime bank securities, which are these bogus instruments that purport to represent a secondary market for standby letters of credit, a big mouthful, completely phony, just like crypto, just sounds really sophisticated, big offering documents, but nothing to them at all. And when I would hear that a broker dealer was actually selling these things, I would walk over to the examination people and say, hey, you guys should do a 4-cause examination tomorrow. Let us know what's going on in there, and then we'll bring an enforcement action, freezing everything right away. So you can, when you're a registered entity, you are under the constant scrutiny of the SEC. And you might say, that's a terrible thing. I hate government scrutiny. I just want to be able to live my life the way I live my life. Well, then you should vote to repeal those laws, because those laws are there to protect people from themselves. And so the idea that, hey, this stuff is scarce, and these guys can get away with spewing that sort of nonsense because none of them are registered in any way, shape, or form. So they don't ever have to account to anybody about anything that they're saying. That's what I was talking about the 15,000 Morgan Stanley brokers. If they're out there saying, hey, buy this because of the scarcity, and if they put it in an email, they put it in a text, they put it in a phone call, all that stuff is recorded. The SEC can capture that and can bring a case against them. So, in these situations, you're relying on these marketplaces, like David Gerard said, that have massive market manipulation, wash trades, match trades, sock puppets. All that kind of nonsense goes on in these marketplaces because there's no transparency whatsoever. So not only are you buying because of this absurd hype that, hey, buy some because there's not a lot of it, you're also buying into a marketplace where you have no idea. It's a complete den of thieves. And if you look at all the cases that the SEC has brought, there's good reason why these entities don't want to register. And the reason is because they will be held accountable for what they're doing. I realize it's not cheap to register, it's not enjoyable, but it provides security for you. It's just like flying in an airplane. You can't just get a license to fly an airplane and start flying them on American Airlines and Delta Airlines without all sorts of tests and safety. That's to keep us safe. And this is what keeps the market safe, because this kind of nonsense can impact your retirement. I'm very close to retirement, or I'm kind of in semi-retirement now. I don't want all this stuff messing up the financial system, so I have to deal with another crash because of all these people who want to get rich quick for doing nothing. So that kind of hype, you just have to ignore it. It's the same kind of stuff that I heard for the 20 years that I was at the SEC, and they use blockchain the same way. This idea that blockchain is somehow transformative is just so absurd. Listen to the earnings reports, the earnings calls of Amazon, Google, Apple, Oracle, the greatest database company in the world. None of them are talking about blockchain. Now, if it was such a wonderful thing, don't you think one of these companies would be doing something other than, maybe a few pages on their website dedicated to some consulting services? And ask yourself this question. If blockchain disappeared tomorrow, if it was gone, how would your life change? Of course, if iPhones were gone, your life would change dramatically. If the cloud suddenly didn't work, your life would change dramatically. But if the internet was gone, just lose your Wi-Fi for a day. Your life changes dramatically. If blockchain was gone, guess what? Nothing will happen.
I just wanted to add to that. Really great descriptions that you guys provided in saying that, this origin story that, there's scarcity is very much the exact same story that was told about, the gold standard and whatnot, going back, certainly to like the 1896 election. This was the fundamental thing between William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley. McKinley being for the gold standard and Bryan arguing for inclusion of silver so as to have a more liquid currency. But, the idea that scarcity somehow or another is great and that, fiat currency is evil. All of this goes back to the same arguments that have been made repeatedly again and again, typically by the wealthy class, saying that, they don't want their wealth to be diluted by, the unwashed getting access to money, these kinds of arguments. So, you can look at 1933, there was an incident then called the business plot, wherein a bunch of rich industrialists tried to overthrow the government because Roosevelt, started to repeal the gold standard with an executive order 6102. And, this just goes like on and on and on. So this idea where Bitcoin is defined fundamentally as scarce in opposition to dollars, which are not, is part of the design and the intent of this technology. And that from looking at the Genesis block. Look at what was included in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, the story about bailing out banks and, this kind of grievance-oriented way of perceiving finance. Now, you can get into arguments about how fiat currencies are managed and whether the central banks are well managed and how they should be governed and all of that. And those are reasonable conversations to have. But the idea that, there's like sort of the pure way, there's this Manichaean kind of conflict between fiat currency and the pure, sort of biblical money that, is represented by something like gold or Bitcoin is just crazy nonsense. And, you look at the fact that Bitcoin is also, priced in dollars. Like if you didn't price it in dollars, then the number wouldn't go up, right? Like it would just be people sticking things in a store of something. And the idea that, it is some kind of practical hedge against real inflation just hasn't proven out to be true. Now, maybe in some theoretical universe far in the future where all of this, is taken to some extreme, maybe you might see that in some way. But even then, I think it would be very clunky and very subject to fraud and all kinds of breakage. And, at the end of the day, right now, Bitcoin behaves like any other risk-on asset in the economy. When there's a lot of free money floating around in the economy, some of it ends up in the stock market, some of it ends up in crypto, some of it ends up in gold. People got to stick money somewhere, and this is a place people are sticking it right now for a variety of reasons. And the fact that there's what amount to real banks like Morgan Stanley or others that are starting to endorse this, and we have ETFs and whatnot, it's very disappointing. And I think that one thing that people of conscience need to work on is to try to make sure that entities like the U.S. government squash this stuff in all of its forms. It needs to go away. And the danger of not doing that is that we will see more crypto capture. And we see it in both parties, primarily the Republican Party at the moment, but it's very much present on the Democratic side as well. And, if we want to be serious about changing the direction that this is going, we need to start a popular conversation about what this stuff actually means. And unfortunately, most of the coverage of this space is very much at the kindergarten level and not really up to the challenge.
Thanks for that, Dave. Mark, did you have anything to say on that?
Sure. Well, a lot of this commentary makes me think of sort of a parallel conversation, which is the role that stablecoins play in facilitating trading in crypto markets, and kind of their analog to some of the assets or the management of assets that contributed to the global financial crisis. I mean, we're talking about Bitcoin as a store of value, but its volatility makes it hard for payments theoretically. And so stablecoins have been created to serve that need, even though we don't see a ton of real payment activity. There's a lot of use of it as speculative investments. But the challenge, right, is in order for that to actually work, the asset has to stay stable. And there are a lot of examples of coins that have depegged. There was a Bank of International Settlements paper that looked at, I think, 60 odd stable coins, and not one was able to constantly maintain its peg. Some dropped more than others, but even some of the more sort of conservative coins have experienced price drops. And even small price drops can contribute to real problems with market fluctuations, particularly when you're looking at short-term trading. And if the whole point of a stable coin is to function as a currency, you don't want that thing to fluctuate greatly over a period of time. And in the global financial crisis, that was more or less a big part of the problem. You had a lot of so-called safe assets, money market funds, et cetera, that were treated like cash by investors or large investment entities. And when certain firms started to go down, certain investments started to tank, those were bad enough. But when all the money was pulled out of those markets into more safe places, it contributed stability because people thought those spaces were safe and they weren't. And when you kind of compound that with the idea that, okay, so a stable coin is sort of a form of quote unquote private currency. Well, we have analogs in our history to what happened with private currencies in the wildcat banking era where states and state licensed banks were allowed to issue their own forms of currency. And that history is sort of replete with failures and a lot of instability and pain. And so there's a reason why we moved to a situation where governments issue sovereign currencies, because regardless of how you feel about the deflationary argument, I'm not a big fan of the idea of this. But having a sovereign entity be the issue of your currency allows them to backstop the economy to prevent against that kind of instability. But if you have a world where stable coins have become essentially shadow pools of investment or even sort of shadow currencies. Instead of having monetary policy you might not like from a government or even a consortium of governments, you have monetary policy set by Tether. And so that's not a stability solution that I think people are going to like. And it really comes back again to, reminding us that the backbone of the financial system, by and large, is still the government, and we need to rely on democratically elected governments to deal with that, flawed as they are. But there's still a way to manage that. It's a lot easier to manage that than someone else's blockchain.
The whole concept of stablecoins, to me, seems to be just to get around anti-money laundering rules. If exchanges could find banking partners, then stablecoins wouldn't have needed to be created. And the secondary function of stablecoins, ironically, exists to introduce inflation into the crypto market, because none of these stablecoin issuers are properly audited. You don't know where the liquidity is backing your coins, so they just dump all of this stuff into the market, and nobody seems to be asking any questions, which is one of the reasons why I contend there are no good actors in the crypto industry. There's just varying degrees of bad actors, because anybody who complains about the price of crypto and ignores the fact that there's 100 billion tether floating around for which nobody's ever seen where the dollars are, seems to indicate that nobody cares. Nobody really cares whether this market is solvent or liquid, as long as they can get out before the music stops. And I think, everybody here has asked that same question. Why is so-and-so embracing crypto? Why is so-and-so? I think we're seeing the effects of late stage capitalism, this get rich at any cost and don't pay attention and no concern about what's going to happen tomorrow. And we're seeing how sociopathic different levels of actors are in this industry by how they're willing to just completely ignore this absurd notion that the entire crypto market is pumped up by monopoly money.
And it's monopoly money that people are using to commit heinous crimes. I just I just posted today yet another article, this one from the Wall Street Journal, about all the criminal uses of Tether. Zeke Fall's book, you just read it, it's terrible what's going on in Cambodia, the way they're using Tether to enslave people. And I'm a ransomware expert. I can tell you that nobody ever finds a way to get their money back when they make a ransomware payment. And I was at a meeting at the FBI headquarters in downtown DC just a few months ago, and asked the question of one of the major FBI people who does crypto: are there ever any instances when you're able to trace the crypto and apprehend the people and recover the crypto and extradite the culprits and bring them to justice and prosecute? Because I'd never read any. And he said, no. Now, you might find one or two exceptions that DOJ will trumpet out and say, hey, we recovered all this crypto from this bad guy. But if you look closely at that, you'll see it was some idiot, like in one instance where it's in a computer, in a laptop, in a popcorn tin, under a blanket in your bathroom. But most of the time, this stuff is not traceable. And there are so many people out there, technologists, who will say somehow that it is, but it is not. If it were, then why aren't the $1.3 billion of payments made in 2022, ransomware payments, and probably twice that in 2023? Why isn't any of that money ever recovered? Why aren't any of those people ever prosecuted, those perpetrators? And the reason is, and I've written a lengthy treatise on this, is that there are so many ways to use this crypto to commit crimes. And every once in a while, a crime really hits home. Like I teach at Duke in North Carolina, and there was a ransomware attack of the pipeline that serviced a lot of North Carolina. And it got pretty scary down there because you couldn't even get home from the airport. Nobody had any gas. And you'd be surprised into how many days suddenly a big community can become destabilized so quickly from a ransomware attack. Just look at that, where nobody could get gas for their cars. Nobody could get home from the airport because none of the Uber cars or taxis had gas. And and then there was, of course, a big outcry right after that. Mark will remember this, to stop Bitcoin, because that's really the only way to stop ransomware. Because but for Bitcoin, there would be no ransomware. So these dire externalities of human sex trafficking, of child pornography, of sanctions evasion, one of the spaces that I did, somebody said, well, I love crypto. It's the only way I can take $5 million and move it around from country to country with me and no one will know. Well, that's great. But we have about a dozen anti-money laundering laws in this country, in the US, that don't allow that. And the reason they don't allow it is because of all the crimes that have happened over the course of time. So, you're not just I think Adam makes such a great point. By facilitating all this, you're not just creating systemic risk for your neighbors and your friends and your family and the rest of the world, but you're also enabling a horrendous crime wave that just didn't exist just only 4 or 5 years ago, just barely existed, but now it's become just awful. And ask any FBI agent, ask any AUSA. I was also an assistant U.S. attorney in D.C. Where I did trials, and I know a lot of criminal prosecutors. Just ask any of them. What do you do when you have crypto involved in the crime that you're prosecuting? And most of the time, it's going to be, look, we just throw our hands up because it's going to take 15 different agencies, 7 different treaties, 6 different memorandums of understanding between countries to just talk to a witness.
I would also add
John,
that.
thanks a lot for that. Sorry, Dave, I've brought Jenny up, who has a question to ask. But before we go over to Jenny, Mark Hayes has to drop off in a sec. So, Mark, before you go, any kind of final remarks on that?
Sure, real quickly. First, thanks again, Jake. This is a good conversation. I wish I could stay longer, and really pleased to join some of my co-speakers here and listen and learn from them. And thanks to folks who've been listening. Some good, thoughtful questions. I think I'd just say, kind of reiterate some of the themes. There are real problems with financial inclusion. We need to solve those. There are real problems with privacy and surveillance in the world, and real problems with money laundering. I think the challenge here is not to sort of buy into a narrative that suggests that technology can solve all those problems when those problems are democratic and economic problems. The famous quote, I think it was a Churchill quote, like, I'm going to paraphrase it poorly here. It's like, we've tried all the other forms of governance, and democracy is the least worst of them. To extend that idea outward, like, it's sort of a use or lose it mentality. And if we have structural problems, we need structural solutions. Tech might play a role, but if we think that tech can supplant the kind of decisions, the kind of responsibilities, the kind of governance that humans play, that humans need to be in the driver's seat for, we're actually signing up for something where the cure could be worse than the disease. And so I think looking at ways we can solve these problems that way, instead of kind of relying on this, is the better way. And I think you can't just look at the technology, you have to look at the industry and the culture built up around it. And I think just time and again, there's been a lot of focus on individual players, as though those players were somehow, like Sam Bankman-Fried, were somehow anomalies, when the problem is actually systemic. There is a systemic problem in the industry's culture and structure that leads to this. And if it's a systemic problem, it requires a systemic solution. In some cases, that's probably going to mean that there's not a space for this tech and this business model in these markets. If you design a business model that's meant to be non-compliant, it's not the rules that are wrong, it's that you didn't set it up correctly. So that I'll sign off with that, but I'm looking forward to staying in touch with folks here, and thanks again.
Great, thanks so much for that, Mark. Really, really important words, and thanks for all the work that you do in this space. It's been great having you here. Jenny, over to you to ask the question, and I might ask, depending on what it is as well, Dave, if you want to potentially give a response once Jenny's asked it.
Well, thank you, Jake. Hi, John. It's been a long time. And actually, David, I'm not sure if you remember, but I bought one of your book. You sent me a book all the way from London, and I read it. It's on my shelf. So I'm just going to be real quick here, no more than 2 or 3 minutes, with my questions to anyone. Jake, David, Gerard, John, I love you, John. But I'm going to start with this. I'm going to throw out an analogy first, okay? And that is, it feels like that I'm in a room and everyone is pro-Trump and I'm pro-Kamala, okay? It's just an analogy. I don't know any of your political stance, so it's just an analogy. So what that means is that all of the speakers here, which I totally respect, are anti-crypto, anti-blockchain, and of course, anti-bad actors. That's the part that I'm with you guys, okay? I agree with being against anti-bad actors in the crypto space, and I've been a loud speaker on that. Okay, now here are my questions. Okay, it's a matter of fact that I recently funded. I'm a VC. I backed the first women-led meme coin because John knows that I'm with his stance, but the only thing's different is I'm actually a pro Bitcoiner. I'm a pro crypto and pro blockchain, but not Bitcoin. And I'm going to share that. Okay. So, as I backed this first women led cryptocurrency, okay, we were the first one to point out that Bitcoin was originally envisioned by Satoshi Nakamoto as a peer to peer digital cash system, but that vision failed after 15 years. So, because it failed, we started to hear things like, oh, Bitcoin is a digital gold, Bitcoin is a reserve currency, Bitcoin is a store of value. That to me is all pivoted from human being marketing made. So all of you gentlemen here did proven that Bitcoin, let's just say, is a piece of shit. And I agree upon that too. So I also, the women of the cryptocurrency called Tetherball that I back, we were also the first in 15 years to put out a Substack article that talks about that Bitcoin share nothing different than even a meme coin like Tetherball. But I'm not here to pitch about Tetherball. Here's my question. Okay, the DNAs are the same because everybody is a cryptocurrency. So here's with John Reed Stock's comment. So John mentioned that on Bitcoin and Bitcoin ETFs, okay, like I said, I'm not pro Bitcoin, but I'm pro crypto. There is a difference. And that Bitcoin is getting into the financial system, like John was saying, JP Morgan's pitching it, et cetera, and that we all agree that Bitcoin is a nothing burger. But if I may give an example, because it looks like you guys are looking for an example in the real world that is similar to Bitcoin, and I'm not talking about gold. Let's talk about vacant land, and let's talk about collectible like fine arts. John, you're an attorney. You probably know as more than I do that the ultra rich, like for example, Elon Musk of the world, they use collectible art, okay, as a tax avoidance, as an asset obscurity, selling hundreds of millions despite the rest of the world.
Sorry, Jenny. Apologies to interrupt. Just in the interest of time, because I know that some of the other speakers might need to drop off soon. Would I be able to just ask what was the specific the question that you were looking to ask?
Well, the specific question I was trying to say is like John and David and everybody saying that you guys been trying to look for pro crypto that answers your question. I'm trying to answer that. Okay, like blockchain. John, did you know that Walmart and IBM are using blockchain technology?
That's false. That is false.
Okay,
it's totally false.
So
IBM was using blockchain technology. They had a project with Maersk, the shipping company called TradeLens. It was a blockchain project, and crypto people are still going around saying that IBM has embraced blockchain. But if you Google it, you'll find out they shut that project down because it was not economically viable. There are companies, prominent companies, that have experimented with blockchain, and almost all of them have realized that it doesn't do anything better, and they've shelved it. That has not stopped people like Jenny, who continue to spread false information that blockchain has potential. That is a false statement.
Well, I disagree. You need to check.
Of course you disagree.
Walmart.
You're promoting a meme coin here. And you say that your Ponzi scheme is different from the other Ponzi schemes. And I can prove empirically that there's no functional difference between your meme coin, although you claim you're the first woman that's launched a meme coin. I doubt that too. But Bitcoin, the whole Bitcoin isn't crypto is another no true Scotsman fallacy. that, come on and promote your scheme, but this is not the right place. And by the way, your analogy of you being the Kamala person and us being the Trumpers is 180 degrees in the wrong direction, because it's mostly far right people who are embracing crypto, because those are the people that like to have beliefs that are not backed up by facts.
I would also add to that if you actually remove the bad actors in the blockchain space, whatever crypto you're talking about, and you add appropriate regulations, there's really no alpha there for you to invest in. So the ROI factor just won't exist. And so therefore, this is only speculative. I've spent a lot of time in the investment world looking, as an angel investor and talking to a lot of other investors. And, I have some friends in the space who are trying to do the same kinds of things that you are. And they argue that theirs is the good meme coin and theirs is the good NFT. And the problem that I have with that, beyond sort of just all of these other conceptual things that underlie this, is that by participating in the space, you're contributing to network effects that effectively undermine the real financial system. And, I know people are thinking about all of the sorts of, technical things that people talk about, being able to do NFTs and this and that and the other thing. But the fact of the matter is that none of those things, again, if you add appropriate regulations and remove the bad actors, there's no alpha there for an investor to try to exploit. So I would question your investment thesis.
That's a nice way of putting it. We deal with people like her all the time on Buttcoin. They come on and they shill their stuff. I apologize if I'm not as eloquent in dismissing the claims as others.
Well, look, thanks so much for that, everyone. I wanted to also potentially move on and talk about, while we have time, the election as well. Obviously, this is a big, very big talking point in the industry. It's one of the ways that the crypto industry has really been most vocal in recent months, obviously with their kind of unprecedented political spending. So I wanted to devote some of the space to really focusing in on that. Obviously we've seen huge amounts of spending. And potentially also inappropriate spending, illicit campaign financing as well, which Molly White, together with Public Citizen, highlighted that Coinbase were potentially in breach of campaign financing violations. So this has been very prominent. Obviously, Trump spoke at the Bitcoin conference as well. So there's been a lot of attention around this. What I wanted to know, though, what I wanted to get some of your views on was, what exactly is the industry trying to achieve here? They're spending record amounts. They're spending more than Big Pharma. They're spending more than Big Oil. What is it exactly that they want in return for this money? I don't know if anyone has a view on that.
They want survival. They see this as their last ditch effort to survive at all. The key problem crypto has, as I said, is that the dollars have gone home. The retail market, it could have come back by about 2024, 2025, because suckers are eternal, I'm afraid. There are some people who really want to be conned, and this is why we have laws about investments and an SEC and so on, because some people do actually need to be protected by themselves. Personal freedom is real and important, but also when you remove these rules, people just get skinned repeatedly. So it's always a tricky one, balancing liberty versus the fact that people will keep getting skinned if you don't. So I expected there could be another bubble, but we just had 2023. All the crypto news was Sam Bankman-Fried is a crook and he's going to jail, like all of it. They tried faking a bubble in early 2024. The price hit the previous peak, but the trading volumes were like 1/8 of what they were before. It was a bubble made of hot air. And so you could literally, Amy and I wrote this up, you could look at what was happening, which was trading against Tether and FDUSD on Binance. 2 trading pairs was the entire Bitcoin market that set the price. And Tethers are dubiously backed. Like, we know that quite a lot of Tethers are backed by loans of Tethers. That is, they're created out of thin air. And FDUSD, I flatly do not believe the FDUSD is fully backed by actual US dollars. These coins are created out of nowhere, traded on an unregulated exchange, and that sets the price of Bitcoin. There's no actual retail interest. But if you want to make money in crypto, you need actual retail dollars. So the US crypto industry knows this. They're desperately trying to buy their way into government somehow. And all they've got is throwing more money than anyone has ever thrown at the election in the hope of buying themselves a legal niche. For instance, Cynthia Lummis's various stablecoin bills, all of which have little get-outs that would let Custodia Bank do its US dollar stablecoin backed by the Federal Reserve, which is a combination of words that, if you know how anything works, should fill you with horror. They're going to die, and they know it. The Treasury is out to get them, because they like financial stability. They don't like bad actors with hundreds of billions of pseudo dollars in the economy. The SEC is cracking down. The OFAC is finally getting itself into gear after having said, don't make me come over there. They had to go over there. So they're spending all the money they possibly can to try to buy crypto-friendly candidates. But there's no election juice in it. The electorate is not pro-crypto. So you'll notice the ads the crypto PACs fund are never about crypto. They're always about other things to build up their candidate and knock down the other one. The crypto industry seems baffled by this. The same happened in the recent UK election in July. They were baffled that the parties didn't care because the electorate didn't care because, we were worried about other things. So that, I think, is the root cause of all of this. This is existential for them. They think they'll be dead if they don't get their pet legislators in this season. Trump doesn't care about crypto. He actually, in his 2016 cycle, he made endless promises to all sorts of groups that he would definitely get right in and do everything he could for them. He just forgot about all of them. He took their money and went, thanks, sucker. You could have spent 40 years looking at how Trump did business and worked out what might happen next, but no one did, apparently. So, my view of it, is that they're doing this because they think it's this or they die. And I hope they die.
Yeah,
I would.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Dave. No, Dave, I want to hear you first.
Okay, so I'll try to keep this quick. But the thing that I would say, in addition to what David was saying, is that we do have a particular scenario coming up at the end of the year with the debt ceiling, which is this recurring problem that we have in the U.S., where we have statute legislation that only allows us to have national debt so big, and every 12 to 18 months right now we're having to reauthorize it. The issue that I think that we may have, if let's say crypto interests are successful at capturing enough of the Congress and possibly the presidency, is that we may actually end up with a situation where we do default on the debt starting sometime in first quarter, second quarter 2025. And the way that could happen would be if, say, a President Trump was leaned on by an Elon Musk or a Peter Thiel to force a debt event, or we have enough chaos and dysfunction inside of Congress to have that scenario come to pass, at which point you end up with this kind of financial eschatology moment where everything falls apart. And this fulfills the great fantasy of Bitcoin where the dollar died and now Bitcoin's going to take over and everything's going to be great. I don't think that that's realistic, but I also think that that's what's in the imagination of some of the very worst actors in this realm. And I would include people like Cynthia Lummis, as well as some of the congressional blockchain caucus people in that group of people who are these kinds of financial eschatologists, which, by the way, also overlap with Christian nationalists who have long been arguing for this kind of a financial reset where the dollar gets blown up and rebased on gold. And this also aligns with the whole BRICS currency fantasy about, a gold-backed currency and, to reset everything in the world on a, commodities-based basis. So, that's the worst-case scenario, I think. I think that's, again, probably unlikely, especially if Trump loses. But the idea that this is even a potential risk is something that I think that we need to take more seriously. And I think Congress needs to act. And I think President Biden should lead this in the next couple of months, really to do something before the end of the year to make this debt ceiling situation less of a game of Russian roulette that comes up every 12 to 18 months. It's crazy that we are putting ourselves at this much existential risk, given, sort of what the desires of the financial eschatology community actually are.
Yeah, I mean, basically.
Thanks for that, Dave. Sorry, John. Just
Yep.
before you pick up, Adam, I think for some reason you are no longer a speaker. I don't know why that's happened. There were some tech issues earlier as well. So if you send me a request, I'll bring you back up. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh yeah, sure. I just was going to explain what would happen at the SEC if Trump is elected versus I'm not sure what will happen if Vice President Harris is elected, but I can tell you exactly what's going to happen with when Trump or if Trump were to get elected. I worked for I think maybe 6 or 7 different SEC chairs, and nothing really ever changed too much. I don't even remember who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. Really made no difference to me in the enforcement division, nor did it make a difference to really anyone working there. There are no political appointees in the entire enforcement division. There are very few political appointees in the entire agency of the SEC. DOJ has political appointees in all the senior positions. The SEC doesn't. They just have the commissioners and then also maybe one person or 2 people in public affairs, maybe 1 or 2 people in legislative affairs. So that's it. So if President Trump is reelected, then everything that the SEC is doing with respect to crypto, except for real serious fraud cases, will come to a screeching halt. Will just stop. All the regulation cases, the cases for failure to register will stop. Any rulemakings related to crypto will stop. Why am I so sure of that? How can I be so sure? Well, because right now the commission is more partisan than ever before in history. The 2 Republican appointees, Hester Peirce, who is an old friend of mine. I worked with her when she was a staff attorney. I respect her a lot. She's a true libertarian. I don't think she has any financial notion about crypto in the sense that she wants to get rich because of it. She's just someone who is a fierce libertarian and has always felt this way. So she's been there, and they call her the crypto mom or crypto whatever, but she has voted against so many crypto initiatives, crypto cases. And Mark Ueda, the other Republican appointee, is similar to Hester, worked for a similar committee. Both of them were former legal assistants to very right-wing commissioners. Terrific commissioners, but definitely on the far right of things. So those are going to be the 2 Republicans. Trump is campaigning on the fact that he's going to fire Gary Gensler. That's not a big deal. The SEC chairman typically leaves when a new president comes in. Sometimes they want to stay. Chairman Arthur Levitt wanted to stay, and he did. But so what's going to happen? And again, I think Dave Gerard made a really good point. And I studied this back in 2016 and 2017. Maxine Waters, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump were all felt the same way about crypto and wrote very negative things about it. So it was, to me, back then, a very nonpartisan issue, but it's become very partisan. Commissioner Ueda and Commissioner Peirce feel very strongly. So one of them would become the acting chair at the SEC, and then a new chair would come in if President Trump were elected, because you'll have 3 from the Republican Party and you'll have 2 from the Democratic Party. That's how the SEC Commission works. When a new president is elected, whatever party that president is, then the chair is typically of that party. Occasionally, they made Mary Shapiro a chair, and she was an independent, but she had sort of leaned Democrat. I think she was a Democrat appointee. So what's going to happen is all of the initiatives, which are really led by the SEC, especially the DOJ initiatives, because they get a lot of the information from referrals from the SEC, uh, will all stop. So you really do have and it's poised for that because you have a very, very right wing commissioners. And I'm speaking as pretty much a lifelong Republican. I voted Democrat a few times, but so I'm trying not to be partisan. I'm just sort of telling you as an SEC observer that'll be very dramatic. I don't know. I think if Vice President Harris came in, then there'd be a chair like Brad Karp, who runs the is the head of a Paul Weiss and a big securities lawyer, a brilliant guy who is big in the Kamala Harris campaign. Maybe someone like him, maybe someone like Dan Gallagher, who's a former SEC commissioner, former SEC staffer, and is now general counsel at Robinhood, who's a brilliant guy. Maybe someone like that, maybe someone else. I really don't know what would happen with crypto. And what happens, though, is they all talk, the new talking point is they don't want to stifle innovation. And I'm sure that drives everybody crazy, especially Adam and David, when somehow forcing people to register their crypto as a security or forcing them to register as an exchange or as a broker dealer is stifling innovation. So that's what's going to happen at the SEC after the election. I think it's pretty much guaranteed on the Trump side.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I had one question myself actually, and then I'll take some questions from from the listeners as well. So obviously there's been a lot of scrutiny around crypto's political spending and all the their interference in this upcoming election. Now, obviously, a lot of other industries, even though crypto has been outspending other industries, a lot of industries have been spending a lot themselves as they traditionally do. I'm talking about big pharma, big banking, that kind of thing. And it seems from just the kind of general tone in the commentariat that either because those those industries are more accepted, or because there's more of a track record of them spending around elections, that they're not getting as much scrutiny as as crypto is. So what I wanted to ask is that is crypto, is it right that crypto is receiving this much scrutiny for their campaign spending, and are the industry's lobbying efforts in any way legitimate?
You ask me, I can definitely answer that. I think it's amazing. I spoke at the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia, and there've been a couple times in my career where I felt like, gee, I'm peaking right now. And that's how I felt when I walked into that really majestic building and I got up to speak on a panel. And on the panel before me was the general counsel of one of the crypto firms that had been sued by the SEC. And he wore that SEC lawsuit almost as a badge of honor, like he's a real disruptor because he's been sued by the SEC. And I used to manage a lot of conferences when I was at the SEC that we put on, and we would never put anyone up on a conference who was an SEC defendant. So I felt like this was an upside down world. And I couldn't believe the Federal Reserve, and they're having another conference this year. I think the same people. So it's become this bizarre badge of honor. It's not a scarlet letter to be sued by the SEC anymore. And they'll fight and they'll fight and they'll fight. And part of their fighting is to rally people, like Mark was saying earlier, to say that somehow crypto was going to solve issues of financial inclusion, which it won't. There's not a single study that says it does that. In fact, there are studies that say the opposite. Tananson Carmona at the Brookings Institution wrote a very lengthy piece about how crypto did not help financial inclusion, but actually hurt the unbanked. And Michelle Singletary, who's a legendary financial writer for the Washington Post, wrote a big story saying the exact same thing. So there are plenty of studies that say how bad it is for financial inclusion, but nothing that says how helpful it is. But that didn't stop the people at the Fed conference from standing up and saying, we're innovative, we're making the world a better place. We're doing this all for reasons of financial inclusion, and it's the big bad, bureaucratic SEC that's standing in the way of all this. So you have a situation where it's, people know. When I was at the SEC, nobody knew who the SEC chair is, but now everyone knows, and they've personified everything in the way of Gary Gensler, and that he's some evil person. So I do think it's an effective way that they use their money. And I think it does have an impact because you don't see as many people saying anything bad about crypto. They're just they speak in strange dog whistles, like saying, "Look, I just want everything to work right, and I want there to be balance, and I want innovation to flourish." And those sometimes are just code words for I don't mind if these guys steal a lot from people and defraud everybody. I'll let it slide if they contribute to my campaign and keep making the noise that they're making.
It's funny. I think there's a self-fulfilling prophecy in play here, where you have people that complain that the government is ineffective, and then they go put themselves in a situation to make the government more ineffective, and then go, "See, I told you." And that's kind of what we're noticing. We idolize the super duper rich billionaires who are anti-union, anti-middle class, anti-workers' rights. They're all psychopaths, and everybody looks up to him because I guess money is the ultimate arbiter of success. And I think maybe that's something that we would argue with, but we seem to be in a minority these days. And I'm flabbergasted by how much crypto money is floating around in politics, but I'm more flabbergasted by people not asking the right questions. Crypto is just inherently simple at its base level. I could explain to a 12-year-old how it works and they would get it. And it seems older people want to make it more complicated than it is. And it's just really, really simple. It boggles me.
Well, we have conditioned ourselves in this country and globally to think that, tech innovation is inherently good and that this is the natural order of things, and that, if we want to be competitive as a country, we need to have as much of it as possible, right? And, the issue is that instead of actual innovation that produces real value for people, what we're really talking about is a situation where innovation is actually fraud. And, having more fraud is in no way a good thing. So we've basically created this kind of upside down doublespeak where these words no longer have meaning. And as you point out, a lot of older people are particularly, confused on this subject, whether they're confused by the campaign contributions coming in or just simply don't understand it. I'm not sure. Or maybe they lack a solid understanding of history. That could be part of it. Or perhaps they're willfully engaged in wanting to, sort of maximize fraud and destabilization of the economy. Some of them are. So I think, that's an issue. And I also think that this whole thing about the unbanked, I mean, this is the equivalent of like using human shields in warfare. You can trot out this whole idea of unbanked people and, people who are, shuffling funds around in the face of repressive regimes as the example for why all of these other fraudulent use cases should be allowed to live. And I mean, that's just a bad faith argument, and everybody should call it out as such.
100%.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Dave. I think a lot of really great points there. I've had some questions come in, so I'll read out some of those. So I've got a question from When Earth, so at Littercoin, so who says TradFi has problems too. 300 million tons of plastic in the ocean, and he's flagged here a story in Forbes about plastic pollution caused by banks, apparently. So 300 million tons of plastic in the ocean, crypto offering brackets very limited opportunities that governments have purposefully ignored for decades. Important discussions to be had. Does anyone have a view on that, on the potential opportunities, although it doesn't state what those might be? So potential opportunities that crypto might offer, and I think specifically in terms of climate change is what When Earth is getting at here, which governments have purposely been ignoring for decades. David, anything from you on that?
I could comment that the guy asking the question is basically pulling a logical fallacy called 2QOK, which is two wrongs make a right, an appeal to hypocrisy. If you can find that, government's done something wrong, that doesn't excuse allowing crypto to do it too.
Some people also call it whataboutism, which, as a law professor of 20 years, it's certainly not anything I ever encourage my students to do, because it doesn't work for, my kids are not grown, but almost grown now. It doesn't work for a 6-year-old, and it doesn't work in any other. Just this whole straw man kind of thing. It's a flawed and anemic pivot. And I don't understand why people keep doing it, because it's not effective. People say that all the time. Hey, TradeFi's got lots of problems, or hey, the internet has lots of crimes. Let's ban that. And like Adam said, it's sort of maddening, because this kind of logic is just so obviously flawed. I don't understand why people keep doing it.
It's a distraction, from talking about how ineffective their own technology is.
And it also distracts from real conversations that we could have about actually dealing with problems like plastic pollution, which we should totally do. I happened to notice yesterday that I received a new Apple credit card, and it's titanium, and so they sent me a little mailer to mail it back, and like simple things like that, where we actually start to deal with whatever the actual problems are. Sure, let's do those things, but that's a separate question entirely from whether a world based on crypto or the traditional, financial system is somehow or another the winner on this fake argument. And yes, I specifically would have called this out as a tukokwe logical fallacy as well.
It's the same way they always say, now do fiat to me. I don't know if you guys get that. I'll say something, I'll spend, literally like 10,000 words going over all the different crimes that are facilitated and enabled by crypto. And someone will say, oh, that's great. Now do fiat. And again, it's that's not compelling to me. I don't think it would be compelling to a judge. I don't think it's compelling under any circumstance. And it does sound like it's something on an elementary school playground and not for legitimate, meaningful debate.
Yeah, no, exactly. And on the opposing end of the spectrum, there we've had Count Gabriel Thursday write in saying, "Law enforcement and ex-UK regulator here. It seems to me that killing crypto would be one of the most effective global crime-fighting things we could do. Does the panel think it can be done, or am I mad/doomed to failure?"
My opinion is that if you were to properly regulate it and crack down on bad actors, you would probably kill most of the industry because people would just naturally gravitate away from it because, again, there's no alpha. The other thing you could do is just simply put a tax on crypto assets of something like 50 to 90% a year, such that any holdings that people might have would gradually be depleted, which would also have the effect of killing it.
Yeah, I mean, in what the SEC, if you look at the SEC's trajectory of cases, right, they started with the initial coin offerings, which is comical, right, to make an ICO. It sounds a lot like an IPO, and they threw all those out. Then there were the simple agreements for future tokens, the SAFs. Those were thrown out as securities, even though a bunch of law firms, for whatever reason, said they weren't securities. Then there were the crypto lending programs. Then there were, like the Celsius and BlockFi, which were found to be securities. Then there were the celebrities touting um, various crypto who all got sued under Section 17B of the 33 Act, which is a strict liability statute. So all you had to prove was that they touted it, meaning they received compensation and they didn't disclose the nature, source, and amount of the compensation they were receiving for promoting that crypto. So the SEC has brought dozens and dozens, and now probably well over 200 cases, and they finally now started hitting all of the intermediaries, and obviously the big ones are Binance and Coinbase, but they're going after them all for failing to register. And I think Dave Troy is right that if you force these entities to register, they're never going to be able to survive. They can't manage an SEC for cause examination where the SEC comes in and says, show me every single document that you have relating to any particular trade, and show me every single conflict of interest, show me every single complaint and what you did to resolve those complaints, which is going to happen to those 15,000 Morgan Stanley investment professionals who are out there touting crypto. They're putting themselves in plain view for the SEC to come in or FINRA to come in, the Financial Regulatory Authority, which regulates broker dealers, to come in and just say, okay, show me everything you've advised on crypto and show me everything you've said about it. So those cases will be like shooting fish in a barrel. Coinbase and Binance and the others are stretching these cases out as long as they can. But when you hit those intermediaries and you begin to do a lot of the AML, the anti-money laundering work, you can stop a lot of it. It's totally possible. It's just a question of whether the government has the willingness to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think you don't need to necessarily ban crypto, but if you just apply existing anti-money laundering and anti-fraud regulations to the industry, you can effectively put it out of business because that's all it operates on. The problem is that if there is one advantage to the decentralized nature of crypto, that is that there's so many bad actors out there. There's so many individual Ponzi schemes that law enforcement doesn't have the resources to be able to go after them all. And this also gives the market plausible deniability. They can say, oh yeah, well, FTX was a bad guy, but Coinbase isn't, and so it's just a huge game of whack-a-mole, and we don't have enough resources to go after it. So I'm not sure how we deal with that element.
So something that I've been thinking of recently, something I was reading, was that I was reading someone, I can't remember who exactly it was, but someone recommended that it's the users of platforms, as well as platforms themselves, who should be prosecuted for using a platform which might be used for illicit purposes. So I think this was actually in reference to what happened with Tornado Cash and how that was added to the OFAC sanctions list, meaning that anyone who actually uses it, should then be, and will then be prosecuted for sanctions violations. Now, is that a viable way of cracking down on crypto crimes, kind of prosecuting or enacting regulation which kind of criminalizes the use of for example, platforms which might be used for money laundering?
Go ahead, Adam. I'll go after you. Oh. Well, I can answer. I think using the AML laws, like we said before, is definitely meaningful, and I think, but an even quicker way is what the IRS is doing, because the IRS is bringing all these. They call them John Doe lawsuits because they just go to a typical crypto intermediary, some sort of platform, and they call themselves exchanges, some sort of exchange, and they say, "Give me all the information relating to all of your customers because we don't think they paid their taxes." Because in the U.S., if you buy and sell crypto, every single transaction is taxable. So of course the intermediaries, so the exchanges, they all fought back, and the IRS has won every single case because the IRS has just said, look, we don't know the names of anybody who's doing this, but we've looked at the amount of taxes that people who use crypto have, that we've looked at the transactions that you've boasted that you've conducted over your exchange. And we've looked at the taxes collected, and there's a tremendous imbalance there. So they use data analytics to convince these judges that someone's not paying their taxes, or a lot of people are not paying their taxes. And they received, I think under the Biden administration, it might have been under the Inflation Reduction Act, I can't remember which it was, or was it the Infrastructure Act, they got $80 billion to go after all of these crypto exchanges. And again, that's totally like shooting fish in a barrel. Another rule, another OFAC rule, right now there's a rule that you can't have an account overseas. You have to report that to through a special form to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and it's required if you have a fund with money in it, but it isn't required if you have a fund with crypto. But interestingly, I think it was in like 2021 or 2022 on December 31st, FinCEN, the Financial Crime Enforcement Network, said they were going to change that rule so that it would include crypto. So if you force anyone who's got an overseas account and is in the US, these are strict liability crimes. So you can go to jail for 5 years if you fail to report the account that you have overseas. So you could look, and this is just a rulemaking. There doesn't need to be any new law. I don't understand. FinCEN announced that they were going to make this change, and they haven't made it yet. Maybe they're doing some more research. I don't know. But that's another thing that I think would change under the administration. Obviously, if President Trump was reelected, that probably would go away. But those are two ways through the IRS John Doe subpoenas that they've never lost one of these. And they're very interesting to read these cases because they're kind of scary that the IRS can just go somewhere and say, we just think something is going wrong here, so give us all the financial information. But on the other hand, the data analytics are very powerful and they've very compelling, so judges have allowed that. And then as far as the FinCEN rule, as soon as that rule is enacted and anybody who has an account overseas has to disclose it, and again, strict liability or you go to prison, those are some very, very serious things that I think would put the brakes on a lot of people investing in crypto, at least those who maybe know a lawyer or know somebody to give them some advice.
There's also another thing looming on the horizon for some of the end users of crypto, if not all of them, which nobody's really talking about yet. And that is the fact that not all crypto is equal, like not all Bitcoin is equal. And because of the immutable nature of the blockchain and how you can trace transactions from wallet to wallet, there's these analysis firms out there that can determine the percentage of your portfolio that comes from dubious sources. And this gives exchanges and law enforcement a way to sanction end users. So you could be holding crypto and never doing anything with it. The one time you try to cash it out and you move your crypto over to Coinbase and the account gets flagged and frozen. And if you go on the Coinbase subreddit, you'll just see that it's just page after page of people going, Coinbase froze my account and they won't give me any kind of reason why. This is because not all crypto is equal. If you have crypto in your account that came from Tornado Cash or some other mixer or from a gambling site or from any number of ever increasing sources that various people in law enforcement and regulatory agencies deem is dark money, then it taints your entire portfolio. And I think that a lot of crypto people don't realize that this is coming. It's going to affect every one of them. And it also, regardless of what administration is in power, this also gives the crooked exchanges an opportunity to avoid losing liquidity by just saying, oh, your account has some shady transactions. We're going to freeze your account. So it works on both sides of the coin. People are going to find out more and more that they're getting screwed all over the place because of it.
I know. And Adam, who do you call when you wake up and your account is frozen and you've got a crypto account? Nobody.
You call the customer service department of Be Your Own Bank.
Exactly. I mean, we looked at, those money laundering machines that they have at all the supermarkets now. My son and I did a study where we tried to figure out how those worked. We put a bunch of change in there. Of course, like 30 or 40% of what we put in there was taken away in fees. And then I couldn't get the money out. I couldn't get the crypto out. I sent an email to their customer service. And of course, they said, sorry, we can't help you. So we knew we were going to lose all the money and we videotaped everything. So it made for a lot of very interesting. But that's the point, is there is nobody to call when you wake up and they say they've frozen things. I mean, it's remarkable that people will tolerate that, because when it comes to Amazon or your credit cards or eBay, there's lots of places you can go to remediate whatever problem there is. But in crypto, there's nowhere. No, I can't send an inspection team if I'm the chief of the Office of Internet Enforcement at the SEC. I can't send an inspection team to Coinbase or Binance or any of those places to find out why your account is frozen. But I can if it's Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch or JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. I can do it with the snap of a finger, but I can't do anything. And your local police can't help you. Your local sheriff can't help you. The FBI is not going to help you. That your loss isn't big enough. So you are really SOL.
Thanks for that, John. I think David has just messaged to say that he needs to drop off. I know he's been having some tech issues as well. So, David, are you able to speak? And if so, do you have any final remarks before you drop off? So I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear anything from David there. Can anyone else? Can any of the other speakers hear anything?
No,
I don't hear anything.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, David.
Hold on. Try again. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go.
Oh yeah,
yes, I hear you.
You're
there. Yes, I've got to go. But yeah. So basically, broadly answering all our issues. Legally, the regulation is painfully slowly tightening on crypto, and the industry is slowly collapsing, thankfully, because, as I said, it's running out of dollars. OFAC is getting more active. FinCEN is getting more active. I must note that Nicholas Weaver had that great success when he wrote out an article in Lawfare setting out, this is precisely how you take down Tornado Cash. And then they enacted precisely his article. So a few months ago, he wrote another one saying, this is precisely how you take down ransomware. So I'm looking forward to all sorts of fun there as well. So I think the great thing about crypto is it doesn't do anything except being a get-rich-quick scheme, and there's not a lot of getting rich in the offing. So I'm reasonably sanguine that things will continue to go well, which means for crypto badly. I mean, should Trump win the election and become president again, I think crypto will be absolutely the least of our worries. It'll be an amazing, spectacular regulatory car crash, because the key thing about these guys is they're not the best at actually making coherent plans, and nothing will work, and it'll be amazing to watch. And of course, as a vassal state of the US, I'm sure the UK will be greatly affected as well. So, yeah. And in conclusion, pivot to AI. And thank you all.
David, thanks so much. Thanks so much for that. It's been it's been a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Cheers. So yeah, I guess that kind of brings us on to the last kind of topic I wanted to talk about, which is, what's next for the industry? Where does it really go from here? And are there any kind of areas or projects or specific firms which are in kind of imminent danger of collapse?
I think that NFTs are really continuing to be on the outs, and the SEC has begun to bring a few cases saying that NFTs are securities. And remember, just like an orange grove can be a security in the famous case of Howie, an NFT can be a security. And it's not that far a stretch to make that argument. People are still making NFTs. If you want to use your NFT as a flex, buy some funny looking picture and put it on your Instagram photo or wherever, and you think it's fun, that's fine. But most of the time, people are buying them because they think they're going to go up. And I think that that industry is really dying, and the SEC is continuing to get aggressive. And the idea, I think Adam talked about this earlier, and maybe Dave did as well, using it as some sort of authenticity mechanism is just another aspirational pipe dream, another, flavor of the month. And I see that as just continuing to decline. Maybe the other speakers have a different opinion.
I continue to be concerned about the worst case scenarios that might emerge if Trump is elected. Partly because of the whole Schedule F thing where, he's able to reach into federal agencies and snip specific people. I don't know the realities of what that might mean for something like the SEC and for, FinCEN and other regulatory mechanisms that are currently doing a reasonable job of increasing pressure on the industry. I think the idea that that pressure is going to sort of inexorably continue without a potential discontinuity is perhaps slightly misguided, but again, I do think that the amount of chaos that would be introduced with, say, a Trump presidency in 2025 would be potentially so great as to make this a somewhat lower priority for them. However, that said, if we do end up with some kind of a debt default scenario in the first half of 2025, then this would clearly rise to being more important in that it would potentially be something that people that are close to Trump would be setting up in a way to absorb let's say, crazy overflow from the traditional financial system. And then also, just while we were talking today, it was announced that, Trump is going to do a big announcement of his new crazy crypto project on the 16th of September, which I guess is next Monday. So he's got some new grift in the works. I'm not entirely sure what all of the implications of that are, if any, besides for it just being a grift. But I think that we need to get to the point where we're squarely in the trough of disillusionment phase of this technology cycle. And I think, there's a lot of good reasons to think we're approaching it and that we're already in it to some extent. The fact that we're already seeing NFTs kind of collapsing, I think is a really good sign. But I won't be happy until it's fully and completely dead with steam coming off of it, like The Witch and the Wizard of Oz. So that's my test for when this is done, and hopefully we'll get there fairly soon and avoid the worst effects that might come with a potential Trump presidency. And let's hope that doesn't happen, because I think it's going to be chaotic on a lot of different levels.
I think this question of which projects or firms are in imminent danger of collapse, I think a better question is which ones aren't. I don't see anything in the crypto industry that is not in imminent danger. The whole industry is propped up on phony, unaudited stable coins. Nobody knows how much liquidity is in the market. So, and there's so much market manipulation. All these exchanges are not regulated. Nobody knows if the trades are organic or they're by bots. So we just don't even really know. Is it going to collapse? Is it going to fizzle out? I don't know. Then people will say, well, if you think that it's going to collapse, why don't you bet against it? I'm not betting. You don't bet against a crooked casino in the casino. You don't do that. I think my realistic projection is that eventually while the greater fools seem to be an unlimited resource, I think people have crypto fatigue. They're tired of hearing the same stories. We're 15 years into this, coming up on 16 years next month since blockchain was invented. And I can resolve just about every pro crypto argument down to about 29 distinct arguments. We've posted them as the stupid crypto talking points, and it's the same stuff we hear over and over again. And I think people are kind of getting tired of it, which explains this desperate attempt of throwing money at the mainstream, which is something that the industry originally said they wanted to distance themselves from. So I'm hopeful that this is just the desperate act of a dying group of scammers. Whether Trump gets in office or not, I don't know if it'll have that much of an impact, but both he and RFK Jr. Are on the Bitcoin train, but they're on so many weird trains. And I don't think Trump cares about any of that, except whoever he's talking to, he'll tell them what, they want to hear. I think this lack of accountability and common sense in mainstream media has been going on long before Trump came along. And I would love to see, journalists come to their senses and start asking proper questions instead of just pretending that crypto has some potential. It's a little bit late to keep saying that same thing over and over, in my opinion.
Go ahead, John. Don't know if you had anything to add to that.
This is so well said and so true. I've been on CNBC a bunch of times, and it's so funny to if I watch it later on, there are ads for crypto under my talking head, some crypto platform, and nowhere do I see capture more than on that broadcast in the morning. I'm just amazed that they won't. They know there's no there, but they have it. I don't know what the reason is. It could be that they have so many of these crypto sponsors, but I don't understand how the legitimate business world can embrace any of this. It's comedy, and if you look at what's the URL, Adam, of the blockchain letter from, I'm forgetting it now, of the blockchain letter from whatever 2000 technologists talking about how blockchain is never going to work for anything. Concern.tech. The one. I'm not sure if either of
Yep.
you signed on. I think Dave Troy might have signed on, and Dave Gerard might have also. But about close to 2,000 technologists got together with this guy, Stephen Deal, who's just an incredible, a really tremendous speaker and writer. And they wrote a letter about blockchain explaining in vivid detail for anyone in plain English. These technologists also happen to be brilliant writers, just how and why this will never work, and that it's just a goofy buzzword that people are using that really has no meaning in terms of legitimate businesses, that a glorified append-only spreadsheet, it's just a spreadsheet, is going to somehow transform the world. And so I think there are some incredible documents out there to read, some incredible resources written by people who have studied this carefully. And I'm equally exasperated at them because, like you, I've been watching this stuff for close to a decade, and it just remains aspirational. And you'll have people say, well, it took forever to build a railroad, or to, and these analogies just don't work. And it's just so clearly not transformative. So hopefully more people will read this, and it won't take some really terrible calamity like FTX to get people to wake up and be skeptical and cautious.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, John. I think that's really well put. And yeah, I completely agree and completely echo those thoughts. I think that's a good place to tie things off. We've been on for 2 hours. We've covered a lot of ground, and yeah, had a really great discussion. But before we leave, I just wanted to put out there just to see if anyone had any final thoughts.
I just want to thank everybody for participating in this and inviting me, and it's just it's a real treat to be able to hang with you people. John Reed Stark, I'm a huge fan of yours. Every time you show up on TV, I cheer. I wish you could get more airtime, and I think that's what we all need, right? We all need to get our message out there, but there's no big mega corporation that profits from promoting the narrative that we're trying to spread. And so we're at a significant disadvantage over, all of these other people that have humongous monetary backing. So I would just say, we all need to help each other, and anybody in the community that believes crypto is fraud, help spread the word. Look at the resources that Jake and myself and John and Dave and David Gerard, Amy Castor have put out there, and help spread the word, get more traffic, get more engagement to the content, because we've produced a tremendous amount of content, videos, articles that make our case with plenty of evidence. We just can't get enough attention. And so we really need to crowdsource this. We need everybody out there that, if you want to stop the fraud and slow it down, help spread the word.
Yeah, I just wanted
exactly.
to also thank you
so much for that. Dave, over to you. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for including me in this, and really an honor to be on this panel and talk with so many other interested people doing the same work. I also wanted to just give a shout out to David Golumbia's book, The Politics of Bitcoin, Software as Right-Wing Extremism, which he wrote in 2016. He passed away a couple of years ago, but his book, he really nailed the design and intent that's behind this. And I think once people really actually understand this better, it becomes easier to see that, there's not a lot of here. So again, thank you so much. And yeah, please share everybody's materials on these topics. It's vital that the public, and especially media and policymakers, get a deeper understanding of this situation.
Yeah, Dave, thanks so much for that. John, anything from yourself before we end?
Yeah, I love this panel. I don't think I've ever enjoyed myself as much on a panel before in history. It's a real sanity check for me, because it's hard when you're out there and talking about a point of view and you're blasted and subject to threats and personal attacks and attacks on your family and all kinds of things from the mob of crypto. And it's just nice to hear these brilliant technologists, because I'm not a technologist. I've just been around it for most of my career and really focused on it from the legal angle. It's such a relief when I listen to Dave Gerard, or I listen to Adam, or I listen to Dave. And sometimes I call up people like Kelsey Hightower or someone like that, and I just say, I listen to a bunch of people talk about this. That sounds crazy to me. Am I crazy? So that, to me, I love being with all of you guys, but I also, and there are others too. Hillary Allen is tremendous, unbelievable. Molly White is unbelievable, the way she covers everything in depth. Amy Castor, Dave Gerard's partner. Those are all really interesting sources to read, because they're pretty much objective and they're always very thorough. So I'm thankful for you guys. And really appreciate it. And Jake, it really innovative for you to put this together. And I'll turn it to Dave Gerard for his final words, because I always just love to hear whatever he's talking about.
John, thanks so much for the kind words. I think David had to actually drop off as a speaker. He's I think he may still be listening in, but he sent me a message saying that his kids have gone to bed, so he's not actually able to speak. But yeah, look, again, thanks so much to yourself, John, and to Dave, to Adam, to David, and also to Mark Hayes, who was here with us earlier as well. I think it's been a really great chat, and again, thanks so much for your time and for all the great points that have been made, and for all the great work that everyone on this panel does, raising awareness about just how bad things are in the industry, in the state of crypto. I think the extent to which fraud pervades and permeates the space really can't be overstated. So just keep up all the great work, and keep getting the word out there. So thanks so much. I'll end things here, and thanks as well for everyone who has been listening in. It's been a great space, and there'll be a recording posted shortly as well. Feel free to share that around. And thanks so much. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Outstanding. Thanks, Jake. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.